Hello, my name is Tony. First, let me tell you a little bit about Herman Cohen. He was an American movie producer and screenwriter who hacked a career out of making B-movies with a capital B. Unashamed exploitational fare, whacked out dirt cheap with an eye on maximum box office gain. He first struck it big, if you can call it that, in the 50s with two novelty flicks for American International Pictures. I Was a Teenage Werewolf and I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. American teenagers were the target demographic, as both titles might suggest, and they lapped it up. By the 60s, for whatever reason, money probably, Cohen shifted his base of operations to the UK, where he unleashed Conga upon the public, a hilarious King Kong ripoff, followed by Black Zoo and A Study in Terror. A Study in Terror is significant in that it's a decent tilt at pitting Sherlock Holmes against Jack the Ripper. Don't be misled by the way this promo poster channels the 60s Batman serial to try and drum up trade. It has a semi-literate script, decent period atmosphere, competent direction by James Hill. It predates Bob Clark's great 1979 Murder by Decree, in which Christopher Plummer is on the Ripper case, and a slew of later books and novels which feature the detective and the serial killer measuring dicks and squaring up. This upscaling quality didn't last, with Cohen endeavouring to trample on the dying career embers of fading Hollywood icon Joan Crawford with Berserk and her last film made in 1970, the completely derisory Trog. Not the most auspicious swan song to cap the old girl's resume, it must be said. In fact, it almost constitutes elder abuse. Still, she chose to do it, and was certainly old enough to know better.
Here comes Trog.
So he does.
You'll laugh at yourself for being so scared.
Wrong on both counts.
But don't laugh at Trog.
Pointless advice, because you won't be able to stop yourself from laughing at Trog. Through the tears, most likely. Cohen's penultimate production gig was this bizarre and inglorious little horror opus. Craze landed at the Market Hall in 1974, sharing a bill with the Kirk Douglas psycho thriller Cat and Mouse. Cat and Mouse, original title Mousy, is a Canadian made-for-TV effort released theatrically in the UK, and it wasn't particularly impressive or gripping, but it's certainly a better made movie than Craze, with a better script and story and better acting. Craze, however, was the main attraction, being promotionally the louder and more lurid proposition, and therefore must have been felt to have a more sensationalist appeal for audiences. On paper, at least, Craze seems to have some definite positives going for it. The cast is headed by the great Jack Palance, and includes an appealing support structure in the likes of Trevor Howard and Michael Jaston, Julie Edge, Diana Dawes, Dame Edith Evans, Susie Kendall and Hugh Griffith. It was based on a sleazy 60s pulp novel, Infernal Idol, by Henry Seymour. No bad starting point for a pseudo-supernatural shocker. Freddie Francis was brought in to direct, and although he was a much better cinematographer than he was a director, he had a decent track record, having worked on Ollie Reed's Paranoiac, The Evil of Frankenstein, Hysteria, and Dracula Has Risen from the Grave for Hammer, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, The Skull, and Torture Garden for Amicus. Then again, he also directed Trog, but I'm not going to hold that against him. It may have been a virtual crime against humanity, but I'm sure that it was unintentional. Despite the positives, Craze sorta went to pieces. As I signpost in the title of this review, it's as mad as a box of frogs. To some degree, this is entertaining to watch, in the same way that watching an elderly person fall over in the street is entertaining to watch, but only up until the point when reality bites and you get that guilty, shameful, this is plain wrong sensation. There's something just off about Craze. It feels, for want of a more expressive and accurate turn of phrase, quaintly unpleasant. It does exert an odd fascination, but it makes you sort of, I don't know, uneasy about it, especially when it causes you to laugh when you know it really shouldn't. Jack Palance is antiques dealer Neil Mottram, and his performance should come with a health warning, so here it is. Palance could slice the ham as thick as a Dublin brick when he chose. He reportedly lost interest, hope for, and faith in this project the moment he started filming. Therefore, in acting terms, he just did what he wanted to, and went the full Vincent Price, but sporadically. He's certainly watchable, careering from whispering cartoon menace to full-blown raging and murderous nut-bar theatrics. You'll never be sure whether he's deliberately taken a piss or just lost the will, in the knowledge that whatever he does, it won't salvage things. So beware, Palance is not at his best, but he is the best thing on offer here, which should give some idea of the level this film is pitched at. Neil Mottram has an antique shop which is in dire financial straits. He has an assistant, Ronnie Martin Potter, who is like the surrogate gay son he never had, I suppose. Mottram is also the leader of a pagan coven who worship a god of unspecified origin known as Chuku. Chuku is physically represented by this. Looks as if E.T. had another brother by an African mother. Chuku resides in Mottram's basement where the pagan ceremonies take place. Cue very appealing topless chick dancing around and slashing her abdomen open in a blood sacrifice. There are worse ways to kick off a film. After the ceremony, a loopy expelled witch woman invades the basement and demands Mottram returns the Chuku idol to her as she is the rightful owner. They tussle, Mottram chucks her around a bit, and she impales herself on Chuku's rather blunt-looking wooden trident. Mottram wraps her corpse in some Axminster and dumps her in the river. Next day, Mottram finds a cache of gold coins in a hidden compartment in an antique desk in his shop. He attributes this good fortune to a gift from Chuku in return for the blood sacrifice of the witchy woman. Yes, folks, he's one crazed motherfucker. Title explained at least. He picks up the gorgeous Julie Edge in a bar, shags her, introduces her to Chuku, then forces her face first into his furnace. That's not a euphemism for anything. Sacrifice numero 2. He enlists Ronnie's help in disposing of the body. Next day he sells 2 Ming vases to 2 Chinese tourists for a shitload of cash. This is further evidence of Chuku's benevolence in return for burning Julie Edge to a crisp. It likely isn't, but as Mottram's bananas in the brain pan, it feeds his delusions. The rest of the film decelerates into a convoluted plan by Mottram to bump off his rich old aunt, Dame Edith Evans, and sacrifice her to Chuku into the bargain for the inheritance. His plan involves setting up an alibi with a middle-aged slapper and former lover, Dolly Diana Dawes, who runs a bed and breakfast. He drugs her, strips her, and puts her to bed. He knocks off his aunt by jumping out of her wardrobe wearing a ludicrous fright mask and scaring her to death. Then he takes her out to the well-kept lawn and drives a wooden stake into her just for good measure. He hot-foots it back to Dolly's in time for her to wake up and find him in bed beside her. The milkman finds Auntie whilst delivering a pint of Gold Top and a ski yogurt. He calls the cops. The Fuzz, represented by Sergeant Wall, Michael Jaston, and his boss, Superintendent Bellamy, Trevor Howard, have a fair idea that Mottram is the culprit, but can't prove it. Wall leans on Ronnie, using those good old police brutality interrogation techniques, but he won't crack. Ronnie's had enough though, and wants out. For reasons unknown, despite his accumulated wealth, Mottram plans to throttle a prostitute to death. The hooker, an irritatingly chatty Susie Kendall, is found by her flatmate, who sees Mottram leaving. Back at the old antique shoppy, Ronnie is taking a rubber axe to Chuku. Mottram intervenes and they fight, resulting in Ronnie throwing a rubber spear into Mottram's arm and Mottram throwing the hapless lad through the shop front window. The police break in and corner Mottram in his basement, where he starts raving and spinning around brandishing the rubber axe like a demented whirligig. Sergeant Wall figures the best way to bring things to a satisfactory conclusion is to shoot Mottram multiple times with a service revolver. Dying, Mottram hurls himself at Chuku, wherein his throat becomes closely acquainted with Chuku's trident. So, all's well that ends well. When I first saw Craze, I found it to be disappointing. It promises giallo-like thrills, sleaze and excess, but fails to deliver. The ceremony at the start is a near-classic exploitation intro with nudity, bloodletting, unconvincing dialogue, and an absurdly rendered Chuku idol that looks like it was thrown together by a class of half-blind primary school kids on papier-mâché day. From there on, it stutters and stumbles into a queasy, uneven ramble of poorly scripted, indifferently acted, and uninspired mediocrity. The murders are made to appear nastier than they are by what is suggested rather than shown. So although it isn't graphically explicit and doesn't manage to effectively shock, it does leave something of an unsavoury aftertaste. Many films of this type and from this time generated a camp, weirdly feel-good vibe and have remained quite endearing in their way. My favourite examples would be the likes of Dracula AD 1972 or Scream and Scream Again. Craze doesn't achieve this. It's not all bad though. There's mileage in Jack Palance's erratic honey-roasted performance, there's the obligatory early 70s atmosphere captured in the fashions of the time and location scenes, the laughable moments, the absurdity of the premise. It feels like an extended episode from one of the Amicus portmanteau horror movies, Dr. Terror, Torture Garden, Tales from the Crypt. A trimmer, leaner, abridged version would have fitted in well with that format. Over time it has become something of a cult item, but then so has Trog and a lot of other things, so how much of a recommendation that is remains debatable. It's got its fans and I get why it does, and I will admit that having recently watched it again I enjoyed it a lot more than I did initially. My expectations were lower of course, and nostalgia is probably the bonus ingredient from my perspective, but that wouldn't hold true for many others who don't have it as part of their viewing history. It's not the best of its type, but that said, neither is it the worst. I personally wouldn't pay good money for it, but if you feel so inclined, there is a version kicking around on YouTube for free, or if you keep your eyes peeled, it might crop up on TCM or Talking Pictures at some point. The DVD version retails on Amazon for £9, and some of the customer reviews are alarmingly positive. Some people really love it. I wouldn't pay £9 for it myself, but die-hard fans clearly would. There is no Blu-ray version to my knowledge, at least not yet. Thanks for your time and attention. If it tickles your fancy, please consider liking, not liking, commenting, suggesting future review content, or even subscribing. Up to you. Meanwhile, here's a song called
The desert knows me and calls me, each riverbed dry as a stone. Vultures circle in the haloed sun for a glimpse of some meat on the bone. There'll be no more cheap shots, from now on everything will cost. So set the price and hike it, we'll pay it and we'll damn well like it. Dark thoughts won't ever quit, howling in their misery. At the very heart of it, there has to be a better part of me. These glass walls show me the background, a city scene there's to collect. Negatives ghost on the tinted face of a monolith built to reflect. There'll be no more handouts, from this day everyone will pay. So do the worst you can do, we'll take it and we'll curse and damn you. Dark deeds won't ever quit, plotting out with a destiny. At the very heart of it, there has to be a better part of me. Telegram Sam and Cactus Jack get down to jam with the rats in the pack. Swans may be white, but the outlook is black. Everything we loved ain't never coming back. Days won't ever end, burning with adversity. It's no picnic to defend, but there has to be a better part.